Imagine a place where the sun always seems to shine a little brighter, where laughter dances on the breeze, and life unfolds with the gentle rhythm of the seasons. This was Mabweni, the beloved home of the Ikande tribe. Tucked away like a hidden gem, the village hummed with activity, children chasing chickens, elders weaving stories with their hands, and farmers tending their vibrant crops. Every morning, the scent of wood smoke mingled with the sweet aroma of dew-kissed earth, a promise of another peaceful day. Mabweni wasn't alone in its beauty, it lay nestled right at the edge of the whispering woods. These woods were a marvel, a towering kingdom of emerald leaves and ancient trees, teeming with life. For generations, the Ikande had coexisted with the woods, respecting its power, drawing sustenance from its bounty, and listening to its secrets. But lately, those whispers had taken on a new, unsettling tone, like a familiar lullaby suddenly sung by a stranger. The woods, once a vibrant protector, now felt watchful, and just a little ominous. Among the Ikande, there was a young woman named Nyala. Nyala was different. While others respected the woods, she seemed to understand them. She moved through the undergrowth with a dancer's grace, her senses attuned to the forest's subtle language. The rustle of a leaf, the call of a distant bird, the scent of damp earth. To Nyala, these weren't just background noise, they were stories, warnings, invitations. She often spent hours deep within the trees, her presence as natural there as any deer or squirrel. This unusual bond made her a bridge between the human world and the wild, a connection that few others possessed. It was Nyala who first noticed it, a subtle discord in the forest's grand symphony. At first, it was barely perceptible, like a single off-key note in a beautiful song. The usual chatter of monkeys grew strangely quiet. The vibrant plumage of forest birds seemed a touch duller, their calls less joyful. Then, the strangeness began to creep into Mabweni itself. The water in the village stream, usually crystal clear and lively, occasionally ran with a faint, murky tinge. The sturdy root crops, once abundant, sometimes yielded less, or showed tiny, dark blemishes that no one could explain. It was as if a tiny, unseen crack had appeared in the foundation of their perfect world. These weren't dramatic disasters, not yet. There were no terrible plagues or roaring fires. Instead, it was a creeping unease, a quiet disruption of the ancient rhythms that had governed the Ikande for centuries. The hunt was less fruitful, the harvest a little leaner, the evening communal stories a touch more subdued. The very air felt different, no longer quite as crisp and welcoming. A shadow, silent and unseen, was beginning to stretch over Mabweni, and Nyala, with her deep connection to the land, could feel its cold tendrils reaching, even before anyone else understood what was happening. The blight that had slowly been creeping through the Ikande lands now deepened into something far more sinister, a pervasive dread the people named the Weeping Sickness. It was as if the very world was shedding tears. Crops, once vibrant and bountiful, now withered with alarming speed. The yams in the soil turned mushy and black, oozing a dark, bitter sap that looked eerily like tears. Maize stalks bowed low, their leaves drooping and yellowing, weeping a sticky, putrid fluid. Even the hardy fruit trees dropped their unripe bounty, which shriveled on the ground, leaving a trail of sorrowful decay. The vibrant greens of the Ikande fields were replaced by a sickly, uniform gray-brown, a clear sign that hunger, a dreaded enemy, was on its way. The animals, usually a source of comfort and sustenance, were not spared. The goats, typically nimble and noisy, became lethargic, their usually bright eyes now rheumy and watery, as if they too were constantly crying. Their coughs echoed hollowly through the village. Chickens huddled together, their feathers dull and ruffled, some simply dropping dead without warning. Even the fish in the river, usually plentiful, grew scarce, and those caught were sickly, their scales covered in strange lesions. The natural rhythm of life, the vibrant hum of the Ikande world, was replaced by a disturbing quiet, punctuated only by groans and the low, mournful sounds of ailing creatures. And then, the sickness gripped the Ikande people themselves. It began subtly, a persistent cough, a gnawing fatigue that no amount of rest could cure. Soon, however, eyes became perpetually red-rimmed and watery, as if they had wept for days. Fevers came and went, leaving behind a profound weakness, a sense of being drained of all life and joy. Children, especially, were vulnerable, their small bodies struggling against the unseen enemy. It wasn't just physical, a deep, inexplicable sadness settled over everyone, a feeling of being weighed down, mirroring the silent weeping of their land. Panic, a cold serpent, began to slither through the village. Whispers turned to urgent discussions, then to fearful shouts. People looked at each other with frantic glances, suspicion festering alongside their sorrow. What was happening? Was it a curse? Had they angered the ancestors? The very fabric of their close-knit community began to fray under the strain. In the midst of this growing despair, one figure remained a steady anchor. Mama Ife, the village's revered elder. Her face was a map of ancient wisdom, her eyes deep pools that had witnessed generations come and go. While others succumbed to fear, Mama Ife retreated to her sacred hut, a place filled with the scent of dried herbs and the whispers of history. She wouldn't just guess, she would ask. For days, she consulted the ancestral spirits, calling upon them with rhythmic chants and ancient offerings. She delved into the faded memories of the Ikande people, sifting through ancient lore and forgotten prophecies, treating them like a vast, living library of their past. Finally, emerging from her trance, her voice was heavy with a truth that brought both dread and understanding. She revealed a prophecy, a warning passed down through countless generations, one that linked the current crisis to a profound imbalance. The spirits are not just angry, they are weeping, she declared, her voice cutting through the villagers' anxious murmurs. The Whispering Woods, our sacred heart, has been disrespected. We have forgotten our promises, taken more than we gave, ignored the ancient boundaries. She explained it like this: imagine a beautiful garden that you tend with love. If you suddenly stop watering it, if you pull up the plants without asking, if you forget the very purpose of its beauty, the garden doesn't just die, it cries out. The Whispering Woods are our spiritual garden, and its spirits are crying out in pain, a pain that manifests as this sickness. The prophecy was clear, the crisis was not random. It was a direct consequence of their actions, or lack thereof. The angered spirits of the Whispering Woods were demanding atonement. It wasn't enough to simply say, sorry, they needed to mend the broken bridge, to restore the sacred covenant, to offer true reconciliation for the harm they had unwittingly caused. The path forward was daunting, but for the first time in weeks, the Ikande people had a direction, a glimmer of hope amidst their sorrow. Imagine a sudden, jarring movie playing inside your head, one you never asked for, and one that fills you with a deep sense of dread. That's exactly what happened to Niala. She was struck by a powerful, almost crippling vision, like a vivid dream you can't shake. But this wasn't just any dream, it was a terrifying glimpse into the heart of the forest. She saw the ancient trees, usually so vibrant and full of life, wilting and twisted. She felt the forest's immense sorrow, a gnawing pain that echoed through her own spirit, like a silent scream from the very earth itself. Shadows, like clutching fingers, seemed to reach out from the depths, and a sense of decay hung heavy in the air. It was a vision of sickness and despair, a truly disturbing picture of nature in agony. This wasn't entirely unexpected, though. It was exactly as the wise elder had foretold, a prophecy whispered in hushed tones by the firelight many moons ago. Now, a crucial puzzle piece had clicked into place, confirming the elder's words with a chilling certainty. Niala was meant for something big, something terrifying. Her heart hammered like a trapped bird, filled with pure, ice-cold fear. The thought of venturing into the haunted woods, a place whispered about only in hushed tones, a place where no one dared go, made her stomach lurch. You could practically feel the worry ripple through her people. Their faces etched with apprehension, like parents watching their child leave for a dangerous journey. They knew the legends, the strange disappearances, the eerie silence that swallowed anyone who ventured too deep. Yet, beneath that terror, a deep, quiet certainty began to bloom. It was like a compass deep inside her, pointing her unerringly towards the very place she dreaded. This wasn't just a duty, it was an undeniable pull. And there was another powerful reason, a more personal one, that tugged at her soul: the memory of her lost brother. His disappearance, years ago, had left a raw, open wound in her heart, a missing piece of her own soul. Though the details were hazy, a persistent ache, a mysterious whisper, always connected his fate to the same shadowy, forbidden woods. It wasn't with clear clues, but with a persistent ache, a pull towards that shadowy place. Perhaps, in fulfilling this perilous quest, she might finally uncover the truth about him, too. So, despite her fear and the tribe's apprehension, Niala squared her shoulders. With a deep breath, she accepted the formidable challenge. She knew this journey into the unknown would be dangerous, a test of courage like no other. But armed with her inner knowing and the poignant memory of her brother, she felt an unstoppable resolve. The sacred call had been answered. Niala would venture into the haunted woods. The air in the hut felt thick, heavy with unspoken words and the quiet hum of a fear too profound for sound. Niala stood ready, her travel pack a small hump on her back, her heart a drumbeat against her ribs. Mama Ife, the village elder whose eyes held the wisdom of generations, stepped forward. Her touch was gentle, yet firm, as she began the sacred rituals. It wasn't just a quick prayer, it was like building an invisible shield around Niala, stitch by careful stitch. She pressed a tiny, intricately carved wooden bird into Niala's palm, a symbol of safe passage, a promise that the spirits of the air would guide her. Then, with a mixture of ash and crushed herbs, she drew a faint, almost invisible mark on Niala's forehead and wrists. "This," Mama Ife whispered, her voice like rustling leaves, "will guide your steps and ward off eyes that seek harm, both human and otherwise." A small leather pouch, filled with dried herbs and a pinch of homeland soil, was tucked deep into Niala's pack. For grounding, Mama Ife explained, to remind you of who you are, no matter how far you roam, like a tiny compass for your spirit. But it was her mother, Alara, who stood a little apart, her face a mask of strained composure. Her hands, usually busy and strong, trembled almost imperceptibly as she braided a small lock of her own hair into Niala's. This wasn't just a mother's sentimental gesture, it was a physical tether, a constant whisper of, "I am with you," that Niala could carry. Alara's eyes, usually sparkling with life, were wells of unshed tears. She didn't cry openly, she couldn't. To break down would be to burden Niala with an even heavier weight. Instead, her anguish was a silent scream, echoing only in the tight lines around her mouth and the way she squeezed Niala's hands, a grip that spoke volumes of love and terror. This quiet strength was like an anchor in a storm, holding steady even as her world threatened to capsize. She was terrified, yes, knowing Niala was stepping into a swirling ocean of unknowns, fraught with dangers both seen and unseen, human and supernatural. But she was also a warrior in her own right, instilling courage without uttering a single grand word. She simply held Niala's gaze, a silent command for strength, for vigilance, for survival. Niala felt the weight of it all, the ancient blessings settling on her spirit like a warm cloak, the raw, aching love of her mother burning bright. Each charm, each whispered word, each silent tear from her mother wasn't just protection, it was fuel. It solidified her resolve, making her determination as solid as ancient stone. She had to succeed, not just for herself, but for the love and hope shining in her mother's brave, tear-filled eyes. The final embrace was a silent conversation, a desperate wish for safety, an affirmation of love, and a promise of return. Niala held her mother tight, breathing in her familiar scent one last time, engraving the feel of her arms into memory. Then, with a last, lingering look, Niala turned towards the open doorway, towards the uncertain path ahead. The blessings were hers, the charms her shield, and her mother's fear, transformed by love, was now the very essence of her courage. Stepping across the threshold into the whispering woods felt less like entering a forest and more like diving into a kaleidoscope gone haywire. One moment, Niala was surrounded by the familiar green tapestry of ancient trees, the next, everything warped. It was as if the forest itself took a deep, unsettling breath and decided to rearrange its internal organs just for her. Imagine a beautiful, intricate stained glass window. Now, picture that window melting and reforming before your very eyes, its vibrant colors twisting into distorted, unsettling patterns. That's what the Whispering Woods became. Trees that stood tall and proud moments ago now leaned at impossible angles, their branches gnarled like arthritic fingers reaching out to snatch at her cloak. The sunlight, once dappled and warm, filtered through the canopy in sickly, greenish rays, making everything look a little bit wrong, like a photograph over-edited with a strange filter. But it wasn't just her eyes playing tricks. The air hummed with a symphony of unsettling sounds. There were rustles that no animal could make, whispers that seemed to coil around her ears without forming actual words, and sometimes, a faint, melancholic sigh that felt as old as the earth itself. It was like being inside a massive, creaky old house, where every groan of the floorboards and whistle of the wind felt deliberate, watching her every move. The paths themselves were the cruelest trick. One moment, a clear, moss-lined trail stretched ahead. The next, it would vanish, replaced by a dense thicket, or simply end in a sheer rock face that definitely hadn't been there a second ago. It was like trying to walk through a maze designed by a mischievous genie. Every time you thought you found your way, the walls would silently shift, laughing at your efforts. This wasn't just a forest, it was a living, breathing puzzle, intent on confusing and trapping whoever dared to enter. And then came the illusions. Shadows stretched and danced into fleeting figures at the edge of her vision, a shimmering beast, a lost child, even fleeting glimpses of faces she knew and loved. Her heart would lurch, her breath catch, before the image dissolved into the swirling mist, leaving her with nothing but the chilling realization that the forest was playing directly on her fears and hopes. It was like a nightmare where everything felt incredibly real, only to dissipate the moment she reached for it. Nyala battled not just the forest, but her own mind. Fear, that cold, heavy blanket, tried to smother her spirit. Every rustle sounded like a monster, every shifting path felt like a personal betrayal. Yet, even as panic gnawed at her, a faint, almost imperceptible guidance began to filter through the chaotic whispers of the woods. It was like tuning into a radio station through heavy static, hard to hear, but undeniably there. These were the ancestral whispers, a gentle murmur of wisdom and reassurance from those who had walked these paths before her. Breathe, they seemed to say. Feel the ground. Trust your own strength. Guided by these ghostly echoes and fueled by a courage she didn't know she possessed, Nyala pushed deeper. The Whispering Woods was a treacherous, sentient labyrinth, and she was its unwitting mouse. But Nyala was no ordinary mouse. She was learning to navigate its impossible twists and turns, one wary, determined step at a time. Nyala continued her journey deeper into the forest, a place that felt increasingly heavy, as if carrying a great sorrow. The air grew still, the usual rustling of leaves and chirping of birds replaced by an eerie silence. Following a faint, almost imperceptible pull, she found herself standing at what was once a majestic riverbed, now nothing more than a scarred, stony path choked with dry leaves and cracked earth. It was here, amidst the desolation, that she met the spirit of the forgotten stream. It didn't appear with a grand fanfare, but as a shimmering, mournful presence, like a wisp of mist that clung to the dry riverbed. Its form was vague, reflecting the lost clarity of water, and its voice was a soft, sorrowful echo in Nyala's mind, a whisper of what once was, a lament for its parched state. This wasn't a malicious ghost, but a guardian, a silent sentinel of the forest's forgotten edges, weeping for its own demise and the suffering it represented. The stream spirit, ancient and weary, sensed Nyala's earnestness but was cautious. Many walk this path, its thoughts resonated, but few truly see what is lost. To prove her intentions and understanding, Nyala had to undergo a series of trials, not tests of strength, but of heart and mind, like trying to understand a very old, very sad friend. First came the puzzles, which were like broken pieces of the stream's memory. One involved arranging smooth, water-worn stones in the dry bed, not randomly, but to mimic the natural flow of water, to understand how every ripple and current once intertwined. It was like trying to put together a puzzle of a river, but only being given rocks and a memory of water. Nyala had to feel the rhythm of the missing stream, imagining where the water would eddy and rush, connecting each stone with an invisible current. Then came the ancient riddles, whispered like the faint gurgle of a distant spring. These weren't tricky word games, they were poetic questions about the forest's past, its vibrant life, and the shadow that had fallen over it. I once sang loud, feeding all that grew, now my silence shouts, what truth does it imbue? Through each successful answer and thoughtful arrangement, fragments of the forest's tragic history began to unfurl in Nyala's mind, like pages from a tattered old family photo album. She saw glimpses of a time when the stream flowed freely, when the forest was a bustling, vibrant community. But then, slowly, subtly, things began to change. Not a sudden, violent assault, but a creeping, insidious alteration. It was like a slow leak in a beautiful ship, unnoticed at first, but eventually threatening to sink the whole vessel. Niala learned that the distress of the spirits wasn't anger, but profound sorrow and desperation. They weren't haunting the forest out of malice, but out of a desperate need to be heard, to warn, to cry for help. Imagine a body with a fever. The fever isn't the sickness itself, but a symptom, a loud warning signal that something deeper is wrong. The spirits were the forest's fever, its desperate warning cries. And then came the crucial insight. The true source of the haunting wasn't a single evil entity or a dark magic curse, but a profound, fundamental imbalance. It was a deep-seated illness within the very heart of the forest, not just a cough or a sniffle. The spirit's anguish, the haunting itself, wasn't the asterisk problem. It was the asterisk symptom of a deeper wound, a poisoned root that was slowly draining the life from the entire ecosystem, including the stream spirit itself. Niala now understood she wasn't battling a monster in the dark, but searching for the cure to a pervasive sickness, and the stream's silence was just one of its many tragic manifestations. Niala pushed forward, the eerie quiet of the forest deepening with every step. The air grew heavy, not with mist, but with a palpable sense of sorrow, like walking into a room where someone has been crying for a very long time. The trees themselves seemed to hunch, their branches like weary arms. She knew she was reaching the very core of the haunting, the place where the pain truly began. Finally, she arrived. It wasn't a grand, terrifying lair, but a desolate, sacred grove. Ancient stones, once vibrant with spiritual energy, now lay cracked and forlorn. And at its center stood an enormous, gnarled tree, unlike any other. This was where the spiritual barrier, the invisible wall between our world and the spirit realm, was thinnest. Imagine it like a sheer, almost transparent curtain. You can practically see and hear what's happening on the other side. Here, Niala didn't find a roaring beast or a cackling witch. Instead, she found what appeared to be the source of all the forest's suffering, the tormented elder tree spirit. It was truly colossal, its ancient bark twisted like a lifetime of worry etched into its skin. But what struck Niala most wasn't its size, but its profound sadness. This wasn't a monster, it was an ancient, majestic being, utterly heartbroken, like an old grandparent who's been silently weeping for centuries. Its sorrow was so immense, so raw, that it was literally poisoning the land. This, she understood, was the true manifestation of the weeping sickness. The forest itself was catching the spirit's grief, like a contagious sadness spreading from its very core. As Niala watched, the air around the elder tree spirit shimmered, and fragments of the past began to swirl, not like a dream, but like watching an old, faded movie playing right in front of her eyes. She witnessed echoes of a forgotten transgression, a deep wrong committed long, long ago by one of her own Ikande ancestors. She saw them, not evil, perhaps, but certainly misguided, driven by a desperate desire. They were desecrating a sacred spring, a place brimming with natural magic and life, all to unearth a rare, glowing crystal buried beneath its waters. This crystal, radiant with an otherworldly light, promised power or perhaps healing, but its retrieval came at an unimaginable cost. It was a stark, brutal image, the ancestors' focused determination, the crystal's dazzling allure, and the spring's lifeblood draining away, leaving behind a scarred, empty hollow. The elder tree spirit, guardian of the entire forest, had borne witness to this act, feeling the pain of the desecrated spring as if it were its own wound. In that heart-wrenching moment, everything clicked for Niala. It hit her like a cold splash of water, the missing piece of a giant, sad puzzle. She understood the deep, undeniable connection between her ancestors' actions, their thirst for that radiant crystal, and the current plight of the forest, the sorrow of the elder tree spirit, and the widespread suffering of the weeping sickness. The past wasn't just history, it was a living wound, festering for generations, and now, it was her burden to heal. Imagine standing before something ancient and immense, a living monument of wisdom and power, but now twisted by an agony so profound it shakes the very air around you. That's what Niala faced in the elder tree spirit. The spirit wasn't just angry, it was enveloped in a primal, raw grief, like a grandparent who has lost a child, but with the added weight of centuries of life force flowing through its ancient roots. Its sorrow wasn't a quiet weeping, it was a roaring, guttural lament that vibrated through the earth itself, laced with a righteous fury that could have easily incinerated any who dared to stand against it. But Neala didn't raise her weapons, didn't conjure a defensive shield. She didn't see an enemy, she saw a wounded, grieving elder. Her own heart ached in response, recognizing the pure, unadulterated pain. Instead of fighting, she knelt. Not in surrender, but in profound humility and respect. This wasn't a cold, calculated apology, it was a deeply personal ritual of atonement. She offered her own tears, letting them fall onto the scarred earth at the tree's base. It was as if she were offering a cup of her own clean water to someone parched, not to fix the drought, but to share the burden of their thirst and sorrow. With a voice trembling but resolute, she didn't just apologize for her oversight, but for the collective ignorance of her people throughout generations. "We will heal this," she promised, her words echoing with sincerity. "My people will dedicate themselves to restoration. We will mend what was broken, not just replace what was lost." It was a vow to commit resources, time, and the very essence of her community to bring life back to this wounded heart of the forest. As her tears mingled with the earth, something profound shifted. The spirit's furious roar didn't vanish instantly, but it softened, like a storm cloud slowly dissipating after a torrential downpour. A silent understanding passed between them, a profound, ancient bond forged not in words, but in shared grief and a solemn, soul-deep commitment. This was the Pact of Tears, a sacred agreement witnessed by the land itself, where tears were the currency of atonement and the promise of a future. Even as the immediate rage subsided, the sheer weight of the spirit's sorrow didn't lift from Neala. Instead, it poured into her, threatening to consume her entirely. It was the accumulated grief of centuries, magnified by this recent, profound loss, and Neala felt the crushing burden of her ancestors' past mistakes and her people's lingering ignorance pressing down upon her. It was like standing in an ocean of sadness, trying desperately not to be swept away by its overwhelming currents. In that moment of shared grief, she fully grasped the terrible truth about the shimmering crystal they had taken. It wasn't just a beautiful gem, a dazzling curiosity. It was the very heartbeat of that part of the forest. Imagine the forest as a giant, intricate clock. The crystal wasn't just a decoration on its face, it was the mainspring, the crucial gear that kept everything ticking, synchronizing the seasons, directing the flow of life, and connecting the elder tree spirit to the wider mystical network of the land. When it was taken, it wasn't just a wound, it was like ripping out a vital organ, leaving the forest reeling, gasping for breath, its very essence bleeding away. This heartbreaking understanding solidified Neala's resolve. The task before them wasn't merely to replace a pretty stone, it was to perform open heart surgery on the land itself. The pact was made, heavy with both overwhelming sorrow and a fragile, desperate seed of hope for true healing. With a final, trembling whisper, Neala completed the ancient ritual. A deep hum vibrated through the very roots of the grove, a sound of profound release. The heavy, suffocating feeling that had clung to the air like a wet cloak began to lift, slowly, gently, as if the forest itself was letting out a long-held breath. It was like watching a dark storm cloud finally dissipate, leaving behind a lighter, cleaner sky. Then, from the heart of the ancient trees, a soft, living glow began to emanate. It wasn't a bright, blinding light, but a tender, pearlescent shimmer. Like the first shy candle flame in a deep darkness, promising warmth. Neala felt utterly drained, her muscles screaming, her legs threatening to buckle. Yet, a fierce, quiet resolve burned in her chest, a tiny ember of purpose that refused to be extinguished. Turning her back on the now faintly luminous grove, she began her journey home. Each step was a monumental effort, but with every meter, she sensed a subtle shift. The air, once heavy and still, now carried a faint, fresh scent of damp earth and new life. A distant, tentative birdsong reached her ears, and she imagined tiny green shoots beginning to unfurl where only barrenness had been. The forest, once dormant and sickly, was slowly, hesitantly stirring back to life, like a patient taking their first weak steps after a long illness. She walked, carrying not just her physical exhaustion, but an immense, invisible weight. It was the burden of the hard-won truth she now possessed, what she had uncovered, the sacrifices demanded. And nestled within that heavy truth, like a fragile, precious egg in a sturdy basket, was the immense, fragile hope for her village. A hope that, despite everything, they could finally heal and return to the light. The air in Mabweni still carried the scent of hardship, a lingering sadness that clung to the dry earth and the worried lines on people's faces. But as Nyala stepped back into the village, a fragile thread of hope hummed beneath the surface, a quiet anticipation that had gathered with every distant drumbeat of her return. She was a ghost of her former self, her body etched with the trials of a journey that had spanned treacherous lands and unseen realms. Yet, in her eyes, a fierce, unwavering light burned, the light of a truth too profound to ignore. The entire village gathered under the star-dusted sky, their usual boisterous chatter replaced by a hushed reverence. Mama Ife, her face a map of wisdom and quiet strength, sat at the head of the assembly, her gaze steady on Nyala. Every eye was on the young woman, eager for news, yet perhaps dreading it too. Nyala began to speak, her voice raspy at first, then gaining power as she recounted her incredible odyssey. She spoke of the trials, the whispered guidance of ancient spirits, and finally, her awe-inspiring encounter with the elder tree spirit. A being so ancient it remembered the very first breath of the world. It was there, beneath its colossal, whispering branches, that the true burden of her message was revealed. Imagine tracing a family tree, only to discover a hidden branch, a forgotten secret that had quietly poisoned the roots for generations. That was the weight of what Nyala unveiled. Their ancestors, in their ambition and perhaps ignorance, had committed a profound transgression against the land and, specifically, against the sacred spring, the very heart of Mabweni's life and spirit. It wasn't an act of malice, Nyala explained, but a profound disrespect, like repeatedly taking from a generous friend without ever giving back, or worse, polluting the very wellspring of their friendship. This disregard had slowly, subtly, weakened the fabric of their existence, leading to the struggles they now endured. The suffering of the tribe was a mirror, reflecting the slow, painful decline of the sacred spring. The revelation hung heavy in the air, a shocking truth that caused gasps and murmurs of disbelief, then a wave of shared grief and understanding. It was a humbling, almost unbearable truth, yet it also offered clarity. They weren't just victims of bad luck, they were living out a generational consequence. But the elder tree spirit had not just delivered a judgment, it had offered a path to redemption. Its demand was clear: restitution. It's like making amends after breaking something precious, Nyala explained, her voice strong. The spirit demands that we mend what was broken, that we dedicate ourselves, with heart and soul, to healing the sacred spring. Only then can Mabweni truly be reborn. Led by the steadfast Mama Ife, the entire Ikonde tribe didn't falter. The initial shock gave way to a powerful resolve. There was no finger-pointing, no denial, only a collective understanding and a deep desire to right the wrongs of the past. Together, they embarked on what would become more than just a ritual. It was a profound, communal act of repentance and restoration. Day after day, week after week, they poured their energy, their prayers, and their collective will into tending to the ailing spring. They cleared its choked pathways, replanted its banks with nurturing herbs, and offered traditional blessings, each action a whisper of apology, a promise of renewed guardianship. Mabweni was not just rebuilding its village, it was mending its very soul, dedicated to a future where harmony with nature was not just a belief, but a way of life. The journey of redemption had truly begun. Imagine a garden that was once wilting, its colors faded, its leaves drooping. Then, a life-giving rain washes over it, and suddenly, everything springs back to vibrant life, brighter and more beautiful than before. That's exactly what happened in Mabweni. With the sacred spring finally restored, its waters once again pure and flowing freely, a profound shift swept through the land. The heavy blanket of the weeping sickness, which had clung to the tribe like a suffocating fog, simply vanished. It receded like a bad dream upon waking, leaving behind clear eyes and robust health. The village, which had been hushed with worry and sorrow, now buzzed with renewed energy. Children's laughter echoed through the air, brighter and more joyful than ever before. The harvests were bountiful, the animals thrived, and the very air seemed to hum with contentment. Mabweni wasn't just recovering, it was flourishing anew, a testament to the power of healing and hope. This incredible transformation wasn't just about the spring's water, it was about the asterisk balance that had been re-established. The people of Mabweni had learned to live, not just in the Whispering Woods, but with them. They were no longer just neighbors but partners, understanding that the health of the forest was intertwined with their own. It was like a delicate dance, where every step taken by the tribe was mindful of the rhythm of nature. They tended to the trees with respect, harvested only what they needed, and listened to the subtle whispers of the spirits, knowing that all life shared a common breath. At the heart of this renewed harmony stood Nyala. She wasn't just a leader, she had become a revered keeper of this precious balance. Her wisdom, born from her journey and understanding, guided her people. She was the bridge between humanity and the natural world, always reminding them of the invisible threads that connected everything. She taught them to read the signs of the forest, to respect the ancient ways, and to always seek understanding before action. Her presence was a comforting beacon, ensuring that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. The most profound lesson, the true moral of the story, resonated deeply throughout Mabweni. It was the understanding that true strength isn't about power or domination, but about recognizing and respecting the delicate interconnectedness of all life. Think of it like a giant, invisible web. Every single thing, from the tiniest insect to the mightiest waterfall, from the rustling leaves to the deepest roots, is a strand woven into that magnificent web. If you tug too hard on one strand, or break it entirely, the whole web shudders and weakens. The well-being of the forest animals affects the health of the plants, which in turn affects the purity of the water, and ultimately, the survival of the people. They learned that we are all part of one grand, living system. And perhaps even more powerfully, they discovered that even ancient wrongs, wounds that had festered for generations, could be healed. This wasn't about finding blame, but about atonement, making amends for past mistakes, and collective responsibility. It meant everyone taking a part in setting things right, not just one person. Like tending to a deep cut, it required careful cleaning, patient healing, and a shared effort to ensure it never reopened. Through this shared commitment, they found a path to forgiveness and a lasting peace between humanity and the ancient, powerful spirits of nature. The Echo of Balance was not just a story, it was a living promise for a peaceful coexistence, stretching far into the new dawn.